A German communications specialist sat in a prison camp mess hall staring at something she'd never imagined could exist. A movie screen showing Charlie Chaplin making fun of Adolf Hitler. She had been told Americans would torture her mind with brutal propaganda. Instead, they were showing her comedy films for entertainment. When the great dictator ended and the whole room, German prisoners and American guards alike, erupted in laughter, she realized everything she believed about her captives was wrong. Greta Weber was 24 when captured while serving as a communications officer with German forces in France. August 1944, a teacher's daughter from Berlin who spoke 3 languages. She'd grown up in a system where entertainment was propaganda and every film carried a political message. In Nazi Germany, cinema was a weapon of war. Movies glorified sacrifice, demonized enemies, and reinforced racial ideology. Going to the movies wasn't recreation. It was indoctrination designed to shape minds and control thoughts. American movies have been banned in Germany since 1940, but Nazi propaganda described them in terrifying detail. Degenerate films promoting race mixing, materialism, and moral decay. Hollywood was portrayed as a Jewish conspiracy to corrupt pure German minds through subliminal messaging and psychological manipulation. The Americans will force you to watch their poison, warned Dr. Elizabeth Mueller, the Nazi women's auxiliary leader who had trained Greta. Their films are designed to break your spirit, make you question your values, turn you against your own people. When a transport ship arrived at Mobile Naval Base, Greta braced herself for the psychological assault. Surely they would be strapped into chairs in darkened rooms, forced to watch films that would systematically destroy their German identity. Instead, something impossible was announced during camp orientation at Camp McCain, Mississippi. Movie nights are held every Friday and Saturday in the recreation hall. Attendance is voluntary. Refreshments are provided. Voluntary. What kind of mind control was optional? Friday night, September 22nd, 1944. Camp McCain Recreation Hall. Greta entered the converted barracks with 200 other German women, expecting sterile interrogation rooms with harsh lights and restraining devices. Instead, she found rows of comfortable chairs facing a large screen with American guards and German prisoners sitting together casually. The atmosphere was festive. Guards were handing out popcorn, actual popcorn, still warm with real butter. Tonight's feature is It's a Wonderful Life with Jimmy Stewart, announced Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, the camp's recreation director. It's about a man who discovers how much his life matters to others through the help of an angel. An angel helping people through kindness. This wasn't the degenerate propaganda Greta had been warned about. The lights dimmed, and for the next 2 hours, Greta was transported into a world she'd never imagined. Jimmy Stewart played George Bailey, a man struggling with despair who learns his life has meaning. The film showed Americans as complex human beings dealing with poverty and family problems, but finding hope through community support. When George Bailey sang about wishing upon a star, several German women found themselves humming along despite not understanding all the English lyrics. As the credits rolled, the hall was quiet except for soft conversations between prisoners. "It was beautiful," whispered Anna Richter, a former nurse from Munich. "Nothing like what we were told American films would be." Lieutenant Mitchell approached their group with obvious interest. "What did you think?" Greta hesitated, unsure whether honesty was safe. "It was not what we expected. We were told American movies would be very bad for our minds. And instead, we saw a story about good men helping people, like stories we know from home. But if It's a Wonderful Life was unexpected, what happened 2 weeks later would completely shatter these women's understanding of American intentions." The recreation hall buzzed with anticipation as Lieutenant Mitchell made an unusual announcement. "Tonight we're showing The Great Dictator by Charlie Chaplin. It's a comedy about dictators and war. Some of you might find parts familiar." Greta settled into her seat with nervous excitement. She'd heard whispers that this film somehow made fun of Hitler himself, an impossibility she couldn't quite believe. As Chaplin's great dictator appeared on screen, clearly parodying Hitler with his mustache gestures and ranting speeches. The reaction was electric. German women gasped, then began to giggle, then broke into open laughter. The dictator's speech in fake German gibberish was hilarious precisely because it captured the bombastic style they all recognized. Chaplin had perfectly mimicked Hitler's mannerisms, making them appear ridiculous rather than terrifying. Mein Gott, whispered Liesel Klein, a former secretary from Hamburg. He looks exactly like the Führer when he gives speeches. The scene where the dictator dances with a globe, dreaming of world conquest, struck particularly close to home. These women had heard similar grandiose speeches about German destiny. Seeing those dreams portrayed as the fantasies of a megalomaniac was both shocking and liberating. But the film's climax provided the greatest surprise. Instead of ending with American triumph over Germany, it concluded with Chaplin's Jewish barber delivering a speech about humanity and tolerance. "We all want to help one another," the barber declared. "Human beings are like that. We want to live by each other's happiness, not by each other's misery." The message wasn't Germans are evil, but hatred is evil. Not America must destroy Germany, but humanity must overcome its worst impulses. As the film ended, the recreation hall erupted in sustained applause, not just from American guards, but from German prisoners who had been moved by a message of universal human dignity. "This is American propaganda?" asked Greta, still processing what she'd seen. Lieutenant Mitchell smiled. Charlie Chaplin believed laughter could defeat hatred better than bullets. He made this film to show that dictators are just frightened men trying to appear powerful. But the real transformation was just beginning, because what these women saw next would force them to confront the truth about their own country. As weeks passed, movie nights became the most anticipated events at Camp McCain. The film selection revealed aspects of American society that contradicted everything German propaganda had claimed. Casablanca portrayed Americans as reluctant heroes who initially wanted to avoid involvement in others' conflicts, but ultimately chose to fight for what was right. Exactly the opposite of the warmongering savages they had been told about. But perhaps most shocking were films like The Grapes of Wrath, which showed Americans living in poverty, struggling against social injustice, fighting for workers' rights. "Why do Americans make movies about their own problems?" asked Margaret Schmidt, a former factory supervisor from Dresden. "In Germany, films only showed our strength and success." Lieutenant Mitchell considered the question. "Because we believe truth makes us stronger, not weaker. If we pretend problems don't exist, we can't solve them." The concept was revolutionary for women raised in a system where criticism of society was forbidden. Gone with the Wind sparked particularly intense discussions. The film's portrayal of slavery and the Civil War showed Americans fighting Americans over moral principles. "Americans made a war against themselves to free slaves?" asked Anna Richter, struggling to understand. "Yes, many Americans believed slavery was wrong. They fought their own countrymen to end it." These films were inadvertently providing a civic education in democratic values. German women were learning about free speech, individual conscience, the right to dissent, and the importance of questioning authority, all through Hollywood entertainment. But the most profound moment was yet to come when these women would see the truth about what had been done in their country's name. Spring 1945, the war in Europe was ending, and with liberation came documentary footage from concentration camps. American military filmmakers had recorded everything they found at Dachau, Bergen-Belsen, Auschwitz. Lieutenant Mitchell announced that the next movie night would be different. They would screen actual documentary footage from liberated concentration camps. Attendance was voluntary, but she encouraged everyone to witness what had been done in their country's name. The recreation hall was packed. The footage was devastating. Skeletal survivors who looked like ghosts. Mass graves filled with emaciated corpses. Testimonies from American soldiers whose voices broke as they described the horrors they'd witnessed. The hall was silent except for quiet sobbing. Many German women wept openly. Others sat in stunned silence, processing the undeniable evidence of industrial murder. When the lights came up, Lieutenant Mitchell didn't lecture or moralize. She simply said, "These films will be shown at the Nuremberg trials as evidence." The question now is, what will you do with this knowledge? Greta sat frozen, her worldview collapsing. Everything she believed about her country had been built on lies. While she had served Germany, believing she was defending her homeland, her government had been committing crimes beyond imagination. But here's what made the moment even more powerful. After showing them the most damning evidence possible against Germany, the American guards didn't gloat or demand confessions of guilt. Instead, they offered counseling and continued friendship to women struggling with collective shame. "This is not your fault," Sergeant Johnson told the group. "You didn't know, couldn't know. What matters now is what you choose to do going forward." These women now faced a choice that would define their futures and the relationship between two nations. The Holocaust revelation created crisis among the German prisoners. Some retreated into denial. Others collapsed under collective guilt. But a third group, including Greta, made a different choice. They decided to confront the truth fully and figure out how to build something better from the ruins of their shattered beliefs. This group continued attending movie nights, but now they watched with different eyes. They were studying how democratic societies functioned. How individuals could resist bad governments, how communities could rebuild after moral collapse. Mr. Smith Goes to Washington showed them that ordinary citizens could fight corruption and win. 12 Angry Men taught them about individual conscience in group decisions. These weren't just movies anymore. They were civics lessons, moral philosophy courses, guides for rebuilding civilization. As repatriation approached, camp authorities offered the German prisoners a choice: return to Germany immediately or remain in America for additional education programs that would help them participate in Germany's democratic reconstruction. Greta chose to stay. So did many others. They enrolled in courses on democratic government, constitutional law, and educational methods. They were being prepared to return to Germany, not just as former prisoners, but as ambassadors of democratic values. The American strategy was brilliant. Instead of just defeating Germany militarily, they were creating a generation of German women who understood democracy from the inside, who could teach others what they had learned. But the real test wouldn't come until these women returned home. When repatriation finally came, the German women returned to a destroyed homeland, carrying something unprecedented: intimate knowledge of American culture gained through Hollywood films. Greta found her family's apartment in Berlin reduced to rubble. Her parents living in a basement shelter, but she carried more than memories. She carried film reels. American authorities had allowed the prisoners to take copies of selected films back to Germany for democratic education. It's a Wonderful Life, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, The Great Dictator, movies that demonstrated democratic values through entertainment. Greta organized movie nights in the ruins of Berlin using a makeshift projector powered by a generator donated by American relief organizations. German civilians who had never seen American films gathered in bombed-out buildings to watch Charlie Chaplin mock Hitler and Jimmy Stewart fight political corruption. Germans who had been fed propaganda about American degeneracy discovered instead films that celebrated human dignity, individual conscience, and community solidarity. "These Americans," whispered an elderly German man after watching It's a Wonderful Life. "They seem to believe every person matters." "That's what I learned in the prison camp," Greta replied. "Americans don't just say everyone is equal. Their movies show it, teach it, make it real." Other former prisoners were having similar experiences across Germany. These women became cultural ambassadors, using entertainment to bridge the gap between former enemies. They weren't just showing movies. They were translating American values for German audiences, making democracy accessible through popular culture. But the ultimate test would come decades later. November 9th, 1989, the Berlin Wall was falling. Greta Weber, now 69 and a retired teacher, stood among the crowds celebrating German reunification. She had spent 4 decades teaching democratic values in West German schools using methods learn from American films. One of her former students, now a government official, approached her in the crowd. "Frau Weber, do you remember when you showed us Mr. Smith Goes to Washington and said that in democracies, ordinary citizens could fight powerful interests and win? I thought you were showing us fairy tales, but watching this wall come down because ordinary people refuse to accept tyranny, I understand now. You were showing us possibilities." The story of German women watching Hollywood films in American prison camps became transformational. Sometimes the greatest victories are won not through conquest, but through the radical act of showing your enemies a really good movie.